The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of St. Matthew's Chapel as Father Rodriguez made his final rounds before locking up for the night. It was nearly midnight when he heard it, a sound so soft he almost missed it over the storm. A whimper, then another. Following the sound to the wooden pews near the altar, his heart stopped. There, wrapped in a faded pink blanket, was a baby girl no more than 6 months old. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Pinned to her blanket was a single note: "Please take care of my Isabella. I can't." What Father Rodriguez didn't know was that this moment would set in motion a chain of events that would reunite a family torn apart by tragedy 23 years later. Marcus Thompson had never planned on being a single father, let alone adopting a child. At 32, he was focused on building his carpentry business in the small town of Millbrook, Oregon. His workshop on Cedar Street was his sanctuary, a place where the smell of pine shavings and the rhythm of his tools helped him forget the loneliness that had settled into his bones after his divorce 2 years earlier. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. Father Rodriguez's voice carried a weight that made Marcus set down his coffee cup and listen carefully. The priest had known Marcus since childhood, had watched him grow from an altar boy into a man of quiet strength and unwavering principles. When Marcus arrived at the church that afternoon, he found Father Rodriguez in the small room behind the sanctuary, gently rocking a baby girl with dark curls and eyes the color of autumn leaves. "She was left here 3 days ago," Father Rodriguez explained, his weathered hands steady as he held the child. "Social services has been contacted, but there's already a waiting list. The foster system is overcrowded, and she needs stability now, not months from now." Marcus had always been good. With his hands, could fix anything that was broken. But this was different. This was a life, a future, a responsibility that would change everything. The baby looked up at him with those remarkable eyes, and something shifted in his chest. Later, he would tell people that Isabella chose him, not the other way around. The adoption process was complicated but moved surprisingly quickly. Father Rodriguez vouched for Marcus's character, and the town rallied around them. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store donated diapers and formula. Tom Bradley, who ran the hardware store, helped Marcus convert his spare bedroom into a nursery. Even Dr. Sarah Chen, the town's pediatrician, offered her services at a reduced rate. Marcus threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to his craft. He read every parenting book he could find, baby-proofed his house with the precision of an engineer, and learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. Isabella was a good baby, curious and alert, but she had her challenges. She would cry inconsolably on stormy nights, as if the sound of rain triggered some deep memory. Marcus would walk the floors with her, humming old folk songs his grandmother had taught him until she finally settled. As Isabella grew from baby to toddler, she displayed an unusual attachment to certain objects and places. She was drawn to anything purple: clothes, toys, flowers in the garden. She would spend hours staring at the framed photograph of Marcus's parents that hung in the living room, pointing at his mother and saying, "Mama," before she even learned to say, "Dada." Most remarkably, she seemed to have an uncanny ability to find lost things. When Marcus misplaced his keys or glasses, Isabella would toddle over to exactly where they were hidden. The early years were challenging, but filled with joy. Marcus's carpentry business thrived, partly because his reputation for honesty and craftsmanship spread throughout Millbrook and the surrounding towns. He specialized in custom furniture and home restoration, work that allowed him to set his own schedule and be present for Isabella's milestones. Her first steps were taken in his workshop, where she grabbed onto his workbench and launched herself toward a pile of wood shavings. Her first word wasn't dada, but wood, which made sense given how much time she spent watching him work. By the time Isabella turned 3, she had become the unofficial mascot of Cedar Street. The neighbors adored her. Mr. Kowalski would save her the best apples from his tree, and Mrs. Garcia taught her Spanish phrases while she tended her flower garden. Isabella had a gift for making people smile, a natural warmth that drew others to her despite her sometimes serious demeanor. It was around this time that Marcus began to notice Isabella's unusual dreams. She would wake up calling for someone, named Mama Elena, reaching out as if trying to grasp something just beyond her reach. During the day, she would draw pictures of a woman with long, dark hair, wearing a purple dress, always standing next to a body of water. When Marcus asked her about the drawings, Isabella would simply shrug and say, "That's Mama from my dreams." Dr. Chen assured Marcus that imaginary friends and dream memories were normal for children Isabella's age, especially those who had experienced early trauma or abandonment. But something about Isabella's certainty, the consistent details in her dreams and drawings, made Marcus wonder if there was more to it. As Isabella entered kindergarten, her teachers were impressed by her intelligence and creativity, but they also noted her tendency to become withdrawn during certain activities. She would refuse to participate in Mother's Day crafts and would sometimes stare out the window during story time, as if listening for something only she could hear. Marcus did his best to fill both parental roles. He learned to braid her hair, though his attempts were clumsy compared to the elaborate styles other girls wore. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game where Isabella cheered from the sidelines than played. She had shown no interest in sports, preferring instead to collect interesting rocks, pressed flowers, and old photographs she found at garage sales. The photograph collection became Isabella's most treasured possession. She would spread them out on her bedroom floor, studying the faces of strangers as if looking for someone specific. Marcus bought her a special box to keep them in, and she would spend hours organizing and reorganizing them, creating stories about the people in the pictures. When Isabella turned 7, she made a request that surprised Marcus. "I want to help people find things," she announced over breakfast one morning, "like how I find your keys, but for other people." Marcus wasn't sure what she meant until she explained her idea for a lost things service. She wanted to put up flyers around town offering to help neighbors find missing items. What started as a child's whimsical idea became something more remarkable. Isabella had an almost supernatural ability to locate lost objects. When Mrs. Patterson lost her wedding ring, Isabella found it in the church parking lot, buried under autumn leaves. When the Kowalskis' cat went missing, Isabella led them directly to the old barn, where the cat had been hiding with her new kittens. Word of Isabella's gift spread throughout Millbrook and beyond. People would call Marcus's house asking if Isabella could help find everything from lost jewelry to missing pets. Marcus was initially skeptical, worried that people were taking advantage of his daughter's kindness, but Isabella genuinely seemed to enjoy helping others. She approached each search with serious concentration, sometimes closing her eyes and standing very still before announcing, "This way." The local newspaper wrote an article about Isabella when she was 8, calling her Millbrook's little detective. The attention made Marcus uncomfortable, but Isabella took it in stride. She was becoming more confident and outgoing, though she still had moments of quiet introspection that seemed beyond her years. It was during one of these quiet moments, on Isabella's 9th birthday, that she made a statement that would haunt Marcus for years to come. They were sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold, when Isabella said, "Daddy, I think my first mama is still out there somewhere, and I think she's looking for me too." Marcus felt his throat tighten. They had talked about adoption before, in age-appropriate ways, but Isabella had never expressed a desire to find her birth mother. "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment, swinging her legs back and forth. "Sometimes, when I'm helping people find their lost things, I get this feeling, like there's something really important that I'm supposed to find, but I don't know what it is yet. And in my dreams, Mama Elena is always looking for something too. I think maybe we're both looking for each other." That night, after Isabella had gone to bed, Marcus found himself staring at the simple note that had been pinned to her blanket all those years ago. He had saved it along with the pink blanket in a memory box that he planned to give Isabella when she was older. The handwriting was feminine but shaky, as if written in distress or haste. "Please, take care of my Isabella. I can't." For the first time since the adoption, Marcus wondered about the woman who had made that impossible choice. What circumstances had led her to leave her baby at a church? Was she young and scared? Was she in danger? And most importantly, was Isabella right? Was her birth mother still out there, thinking about the daughter she had given up? The questions kept Marcus awake that night, and many nights after. He had built a good life for Isabella, had given her love, stability, and opportunities, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their story was incomplete, that there were missing pieces waiting to be discovered. As Isabella grew older, her questions about her origins became more frequent and more specific. She wanted to know what her birth mother looked like, whether she had any siblings, why she had been left at a church instead of a hospital or fire station. Marcus answered what he could and was honest about what he didn't know, but each conversation left him feeling like he was failing her somehow. The summer Isabella turned 10, she announced that she wanted to visit other churches in the area. "Maybe someone will remember something," she said, with the matter-of-fact tone she used when discussing her lost item searches. Marcus agreed, thinking it might help Isabella feel more connected to her story, even if they didn't find any new information. They visited St. Mary's in the next town over, then Holy Trinity in Riverside, then smaller chapels scattered throughout the county. Isabella would walk through each sanctuary slowly, touching the pews, studying the stained glass windows, asking the priests or ministers if they remembered anything about abandoned babies from 10 years ago. Most had nothing to offer, but a few remembered hearing about the baby found at St. Matthew's, the one who had been adopted by the carpenter from Cedar Street. It was at their 5th church visit, a small Methodist chapel called Grace Community, that they met someone who would change everything. Pastor Williams was a soft-spoken man in his 70s who had served congregations throughout Oregon for over 4 decades. When Isabella explained what they were looking for, his eyes grew thoughtful. "I don't remember any abandoned babies," he said slowly, "but I do remember a young woman who used to attend services here. About 11 years ago. She was pregnant and seemed very troubled. Elena Martinez was her name. She stopped coming to church around the time her baby would have been born." Isabella's hand found Marcus's and squeezed tight. Elena, the name from her dreams. Pastor Williams invited them into his small office behind the sanctuary, where sunlight filtered through. A single window onto shelves lined with theological books and family photographs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He moved slowly, his arthritis evident, as he settled into his chair and gestured for Marcus and Isabella to sit across from his desk. "Elena Martinez," he repeated, his weathered hands folded in front of him. She was maybe 19, 20 years old. Quiet girl, always sat in the back pew. She had this way of looking around as if she expected someone to follow her in. Isabella leaned forward, her eyes wide with anticipation. What did she look like? Pastor Williams smiled gently. Beautiful girl, long dark hair, almost black, and she always wore something purple. A scarf, a sweater, sometimes just a hair ribbon. She had kind eyes, but they were always sad, like she was carrying some heavy burden. Marcus felt Isabella's grip on his hand tighten. The purple clothing, the dark hair, it all matched Isabella's drawings and dreams with startling accuracy. "Do you remember when you last saw her?" Marcus asked. The pastor rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It would have been early spring, about 11 years ago. She was quite pregnant then, maybe 7 or 8 months along. She came to me after a service, very distressed, said she needed to talk to someone about making an impossible choice." Isabella spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of choice?" Pastor Williams looked between Marcus and Isabella, clearly weighing how much to share with a 10-year-old. "She said she was in some kind of trouble, that she had to leave town for the safety of her baby. She asked me about adoption agencies, about safe places where a child could be left anonymously. I gave her information about several options, including other churches in the area." "Did she say what kind of trouble?" Marcus pressed. "She was very vague, but I got the impression she was afraid of someone. She kept looking over her shoulder, and she mentioned that she couldn't stay in Oregon, said she had to go somewhere far, away where he couldn't find her." Isabella had gone very still, the way she did when she was processing something important. "Did she say anything about coming back?" "That's what broke my heart about the whole situation," Pastor Williams said, softly. "She kept saying, when it's safe and when I can protect her. She clearly didn't want to give up her baby permanently. She was planning to come back." The drive home was quiet, both Marcus and Isabella lost in their own thoughts. The revelation that Elena Martinez might have intended to return for Isabella changed everything. It suggested that Isabella's birth mother hadn't abandoned her out of indifference or inability to care for her, but out of fear for both their safety. That evening, Marcus made a decision that would alter the course of their investigation. He called his old friend Jake Brennan, who worked as a private investigator in Portland. Jake had helped Marcus navigate the legal aspects of his divorce, and Marcus trusted him to handle sensitive situations with discretion. Jake arrived in Millbrook 2 days later, a stocky man with graying hair and the patient demeanor of someone who spent most of his time waiting and watching. He listened carefully as Marcus and Isabella recounted their conversation with Pastor Williams, taking notes in a small leather notebook. "Elena Martinez is a common name," Jake warned them. "There could be dozens of women with that name in Oregon alone, but the timeline helps narrow things down, and if she really did leave the state, there might be a paper trail." Jake's investigation began with public records. He searched for Elena Martinez in birth certificates, marriage licenses, drivers, license renewals, and property records throughout Oregon. He found several possibilities, but none that matched the timeline perfectly. The search expanded to neighboring states: Washington, California, Idaho, Nevada. Meanwhile, Isabella threw herself into her own form of investigation. She began visiting every antique shop, used bookstore, and thrift store in a 50-mile radius, looking through old photographs and asking owners if they recognized the woman from her detailed descriptions. Her approach was methodical and surprisingly effective. At Morrison's antique barn, an elderly woman named Ruth remembered buying a box of personal items from a storage unit auction about 10 years earlier. The unit had belonged to someone named E. Martinez, and Ruth still had some of the photographs that hadn't sold. Isabella's hands trembled as Ruth pulled out a shoebox filled with old pictures. Near the bottom, she found what she was looking for: a photograph of a young woman with long, dark hair wearing a purple dress, standing next to a lake with mountains in the background. On the back, someone had written, "Elena, Lake Tahoe, 2013. "That's her," Isabella whispered, holding the photograph like it was made of glass. That's Mama Elena from my dreams." Ruth studied Isabella's face carefully, then looked at the photograph again. "You know, honey, you have her eyes. Same shape, same way of looking at the camera, like you're seeing something the rest of us are missing." Marcus bought the entire shoebox of photographs, and that night he and Isabella spread them out on the dining room table. Most were family photos spanning several decades, birthday parties, holidays, graduations. Elena appeared in many of them, growing from a child into a teenager and then a young woman. In the more recent photos, she was often pictured with a man who seemed increasingly possessive in each image, his arm around her shoulders, his smile not reaching his eyes. Jake's breakthrough came 3 weeks later. He had tracked down Elena Martinez, who had rented an apartment in Sacramento, California, using the Social Security number from an Oregon driver's license that expired in 2014. The apartment had been rented for 18 months, from late 2014 through early 2016. She worked at a community center there, teaching English as a second language, Jake reported during his next visit to Millbrook. Neighbors described her as quiet, kept to herself, but was wonderful with the immigrant families she worked with. She went by Elena Santos there, used her mother's maiden name. Isabella looked up from the photograph she had been studying. "Is she still there?" Jake shook his head. "She left Sacramento in early 2016. Her landlord said she gave notice suddenly, paid her last month's rent in cash, and was gone within a week. But here's the interesting part. She left a forwarding address for mail. A post office box in Bend, Oregon. Bend was only 2 hours away from Millbrook. Isabella's birth mother had been that close for years, possibly still was. The knowledge was both thrilling and terrifying. Marcus made the difficult decision not to pursue Elena immediately. Isabella was still young, and he wanted to be certain they were prepared for whatever they might find. Instead, he asked Jake to do more background research, to piece together Elena's story and try to understand what she had been running from. The investigation took another dramatic turn when Jake discovered police reports from 2013 and 2014 in Portland. Elena Martinez had filed 2 separate domestic violence reports against David Chen, a man she had been in a relationship with for over 2 years. The reports detailed escalating abuse, first emotional and financial, then physical. Elena had tried to leave multiple times, but Chen had tracked her down each time, threatening to hurt her or her family if she didn't return. The second police report was filed when Elena was 6 months pregnant. Chen had found her at her job and caused a scene, screaming that he wouldn't let her take his child away from him. A restraining order was issued, but it was violated twice before Elena disappeared from Portland entirely. Isabella absorbed this information with a maturity that broke Marcus's heart. "She was protecting me," she said simply. "She couldn't keep me safe if she stayed, so she had to leave me somewhere safe and go away." Jake's final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. While researching David Chen, he discovered that Chen had been arrested in 2018 for stalking and harassment of another former girlfriend. During his sentencing, Chen had boasted to other inmates about his connections throughout the Pacific Northwest, claiming he had people watching for a woman who had stolen his kid and disappeared. "The good news," Jake told them, "is that Chen was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was released 6 months ago, but he's on parole and living in a halfway house in Seattle. He's required to stay in Washington state." This information changed everything. If Elena had been hiding because of Chen, his imprisonment might have given her a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years, and his recent release might explain why she hadn't tried to contact Isabella yet. She might not know he was in custody, or she might be waiting to see if he would violate parole and end up back in prison. Isabella made a decision that surprised even Marcus with its thoughtfulness. "I want to write her a letter," she announced. "We can send it to that post office box in Bend. Even if she doesn't get it right away, maybe she'll get it eventually." The letter took Isabella 3 weeks to write. She went through dozens of drafts, trying to find the right words to reach across 11 years of separation. She wrote about her life with Marcus, about her gift for finding lost things, about the dreams that had never stopped coming. She included copies of some of her drawings and a recent school photograph, but the most important part of the letter was her promise. "I'm not angry that you left me. I understand now that you were trying to keep me safe. I just want you to know that I'm okay and that I've been looking for you too. If you're ready to be found, I'm ready to find you." Marcus added his own note to Isabella's letter, thanking Elena for the gift of Isabella's life and assuring her that she would always be welcome in their family, regardless of what she decided about contact. They sent the letter on a Tuesday in November, almost exactly 11 years after Isabella had been found at St. Matthew's Chapel. The wait for a response was agonizing. Isabella checked the mail every day, sometimes twice a day, her hope and disappointment cycling with each empty mailbox. 2 weeks passed with no response. Then 3 weeks. Marcus began to worry that the post office box was no longer active, that Elena had moved on once again and left no forwarding address. It was on a cold December morning, with the first snow of the season dusting the ground, that Isabella came running into Marcus's workshop, clutching an envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely speak. "Daddy," she whispered, holding up the envelope. "It's from her. It's from Mama Elena." The return address was different. Not Bend, but a small town called Crescent Lake, Oregon. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in the same handwriting that had penned the note 11 years earlier, but steadier now, more confident. "My dearest Isabella," the letter began, "I have read your letter 100 times, and each time I cry with happiness, knowing that you are safe and loved, and growing into the remarkable young woman I always hoped you would become." Elena's letter revealed that she had indeed been hiding from David Chen all these years, moving frequently and using different names to stay ahead of him. She had kept track of Isabella from a distance, sending anonymous donations to St. Matthew's Chapel and the Millbrook Elementary School, always hoping for news but never daring to make direct contact. She had received Isabella's letter at exactly the right moment. Chen's release from prison had terrified her, but she had also learned through mutual acquaintances that he was struggling with addiction and seemed more focused on his parole requirements than hunting for his past victims. The most shocking revelation came in the letter's final paragraph. "Isabella, there is something else you need to know. I'm married now, have been for 3 years. My husband's name is Robert, and he knows all about you. We've been waiting for the right time to reach out, hoping that someday I would be brave enough to try to find you. Your letter gave me that courage." At the bottom of the letter was a phone number and an invitation. "If you and your father are willing, I would very much like to meet you both. I live only 2 hours away, and I think about you every single day." Isabella looked up at Marcus, her eyes shining with tears and hope, and a dozen other emotions he couldn't name. "She wants to meet us, Daddy. Mama Elena wants to meet us." As Marcus held his daughter, feeling her heart racing with excitement and anticipation, he realized that their story was about to enter an entirely new chapter. The search was over, but the reunion, and all the complications and joys it might bring, was just beginning. The phone call came on a Sunday afternoon, while Marcus was helping Isabella organize her collection of found photographs. When the phone rang, Isabella jumped so quickly she scattered pictures across the floor, her nervous energy evident in every movement. Marcus answered cautiously. "Hello? Is this Marcus Thompson?" The voice was soft, feminine, with a slight tremor that spoke of carefully controlled emotion. "Yes, this is Marcus." This is Elena Santos. Elena Martinez Santos now. I wrote to Isabella. Marcus felt his breath catch. Beside him, Isabella had gone completely still, her eyes wide as she watched his face for any sign of what was happening. Elena, Marcus said gently, thank you for your letter. Isabella was overjoyed to hear from you. There was a pause, and Marcus could hear Elena taking a shaky breath. Is she there? Would it be possible to speak with her? Marcus looked at Isabella, who was nodding so vigorously he worried she might hurt her neck. She's right here. Hold on. Isabella took the phone with reverent care, as if it might break in her hands. Mama Elena? What followed was a conversation that would stay with Marcus forever. Isabella's voice grew stronger with each word. 11. Years of questions pouring out in a rush of excitement and wonder. Elena's responses, which Marcus could hear faintly through the phone, were patient and loving, filled with the kind of maternal warmth that Isabella had been missing without even realizing it. They talked for over an hour. Elena told Isabella about her new life in Crescent Lake, about her husband Robert, who worked as a park ranger, about the small house by the lake where she taught piano lessons to local children. Isabella shared stories about Marcus, about her gift for finding lost things, about school and friends, and all the small details that make up a life. When Isabella finally handed the phone back to Marcus, her cheeks were flushed with happiness. She wants to meet us next weekend, she whispered. She's going to drive here. Marcus took the phone, his own emotions churning. Elena? Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for giving her such a beautiful life. I can hear it in her voice. She's confident and happy and loved. That's all I ever wanted for her. She's an amazing kid, Marcus replied. You should be proud of who she's becoming. I am. And Marcus, there's something I need to tell you, something I couldn't put in the letter. My husband Robert, he's been encouraging me to reach out to Isabella for months. He lost his own mother when he was young, and he knows how important these connections are. But there's more to it than that. Marcus waited, sensing there was something significant coming. Robert's last name is Chen, but before you worry, he's David's older brother. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Isabella's birth mother had married the brother of the man she'd been running from. The situation was more complicated than he could have imagined. I know how that sounds, Elena continued quickly, but Robert is nothing like David. He's the one who helped me escape from David in the first place. He'd been trying to get his brother help for years, trying to make him see what he was becoming. When David started hurting me, Robert was the one who gave me money to leave town, who helped me disappear. Marcus tried to process this information. Does David know about the marriage? No. Robert and I were very careful. We met again by chance. 3 years ago in Bend, I was working at a bookstore. He was there for a forestry conference. We recognized each other immediately, but we didn't start a relationship until Robert was certain David was going to prison for a long time. Even then we kept it quiet. We were married by a justice of the peace with just 2 witnesses. Isabella tugged on Marcus's sleeve, clearly frustrated at being left out of the conversation. Marcus put the phone on speaker so she could hear. The reason I'm telling you this, Elena continued, is because Robert has been searching for Isabella, too, in his own way. He's felt responsible for what David did, for the fear that drove me to give up my daughter. He wants to meet Isabella, to apologize for his family's role in our separation. Isabella spoke up, her voice curious rather than concerned. Is he nice, your husband? Elena's laugh was warm and genuine. He's the kindest man I've ever known. Sweetheart, he builds houses for families who lost their homes in wildfires, and he volunteers at the animal shelter every weekend. He's already planned to stay at a hotel when we visit, so you won't feel overwhelmed meeting both of us at once. The conversation ended with plans for Elena to drive to Millbrook the following Saturday. She would arrive in the morning and stay until Sunday afternoon, giving them time to get reacquainted without rushing. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation and emotion. Isabella cleaned her room 3 times, practiced playing the piano pieces she'd learned over the years, and made a scrapbook of her life to show Elena. Marcus found himself equally nervous, uncertain about his role in this reunion. He was Isabella's father in every way that mattered, but Elena's return brought up complex feelings about identity, belonging, and what it meant to be a family. Jake Brennan called midweek with additional information about Robert Chen. His background. Czech had revealed a man with an impeccable reputation. No criminal record, active in community service, respected by colleagues and neighbors. More importantly, Jake had found evidence that Robert had indeed been trying to help his brother's victims for years, often anonymously paying for counseling services or relocation expenses. "He's clean, Marcus," Jake reported. "More than clean. He's one of the good guys, the kind of person who spends his life trying to make up for the damage other people cause." Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzly, typical for Oregon in December. Isabella had been awake since dawn, changing clothes twice and rearranging her scrapbook for the 10th time. Marcus made her favorite breakfast, pancakes with blueberries, but she was too nervous to eat more than a few bites. At exactly 10 o'clock, a silver Honda Civic pulled into their driveway. Marcus watched from the window as a woman got out, moving slowly as if she too was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Elena Martinez Santos looked older than in the photographs they'd found, but she was unmistakably the same person. Her dark hair was shorter now, swept back in a simple style, and she wore a deep purple sweater over dark jeans. Isabella pressed herself against Marcus's side, suddenly shy. What if she doesn't like me? What if I'm different from what she remembered? "She's going to love you," Marcus assured her. How could she not? The knock on the door was soft, hesitant. Marcus opened it to find Elena standing on his porch, tears already streaming down her face. She looked past him to Isabella, who had stepped out from behind Marcus but remained close to his side. "Oh, my beautiful girl," Elena whispered. "Look how you've grown." Isabella took a tentative step forward, then another. Elena knelt down, opening her arms, and Isabella walked into them as if she'd been doing it her whole life. Marcus had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed by the emotion of watching his daughter reconnect with the woman who had given her life. The initial reunion was awkward but warm. They sat in the living room, Elena on the couch with Isabella beside her, Marcus in his favorite armchair trying to navigate his role in this delicate situation. Elena couldn't stop touching Isabella, stroking her hair, holding her hand, studying. Her face as if memorizing every detail. "You have my mother's nose," Elena said softly, "and your grandfather's stubborn chin, but your smile, that's all your own." Isabella showed Elena her scrapbook, narrating each page with the enthusiasm of someone sharing their life's work. Elena listened intently, asking questions about Isabella's friends, her favorite subjects in school, her gift for finding lost things. "I used to do that too," Elena revealed. "When I was your age, I could always find things that other people lost. My grandmother said it was a gift that ran in our family, that we could see connections other people missed." As the day progressed, the conversation became more natural. Elena shared stories about her childhood, about Isabella's grandparents who had died before Isabella was born, about family traditions and recipes and the small details that help a person understand where they come from. It was during lunch that Elena brought up the subject they'd all been dancing around. "Isabella, I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I also need you to understand why it was necessary." Isabella set down her sandwich and looked directly at Elena. Because of David Chen, because he was hurting you and would have hurt me too. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. You know about David? Mr. Brennan told us about the police reports and everything. Isabella explained matter-of-factly. I know. You were scared and had to protect me. I'm not mad about it. Marcus watched Elena's composure crumble as she realized that Isabella not only understood her choice, but had forgiven her for it. You're so much wiser than I was at your age, Elena said through her tears. I had a good dad to teach me. Isabella replied, looking at Marcus with such love and gratitude that he felt his own eyes fill with tears. Elena followed Isabella's gaze and looked at Marcus with an expression of pure gratitude. I chose well when I left her at St. Matthew's. Father Rodriguez told me that if someone was meant to find her, they would. I'm so grateful it was you. The afternoon brought more revelations. Elena told them about her years in hiding, about the constant fear and loneliness, about the jobs she'd taken and the friends she'd made along the way. She also talked about Robert, about how their relationship had developed slowly, from friendship to love, built on shared understanding of loss and the desire to create something better from difficult circumstances. He wanted to come today, Elena explained, but he thought it might be too much. He's staying at the Millbrook Inn, waiting to hear how things go. He's more nervous than I am, if you can believe that. Isabella surprised them both with her next question. Does he want to have kids with you? Elena blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. We've talked about it. He would love to be a father, but we also know that nothing could ever replace you in my heart. You'll always be my first child, my most precious gift. As evening approached, Elena reluctantly prepared to leave for her hotel. She would return the next morning for breakfast before driving back to Crescent Lake, but the first goodbye was emotional for everyone. Will you come visit us? Elena asked as she hugged Isabella goodbye. Robert has been fixing up the guest room, hoping that someday you might want to see where I live now. Isabella looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Could we, Daddy? Maybe for a weekend. We'll work something out, Marcus promised. As Elena's car disappeared down Cedar Street, Isabella waved until the taillights were no longer visible. Then she turned to Marcus with an expression of complete contentment. I found her, Daddy. I finally found the most important lost thing of all. That night, as Marcus tucked Isabella into bed, she made an observation that would prove more prophetic than either of them realized. You know what's funny, Daddy? Mama Elena found something she lost too. She found me. But I think maybe there's still something else we're all supposed to find together, something we don't even know is missing yet. Marcus kissed her forehead and turned off the light, but Isabella's words stayed with him long into the night. In trying to help his daughter find her birth mother, he had opened a door to possibilities he hadn't considered. The story that had begun with a baby left at a church was evolving into something much more complex and beautiful than any of them had anticipated. The phone call came on a Sunday afternoon while Marcus was helping Isabella organize her collection of found photographs. When the phone rang, Isabella jumped so quickly she scattered pictures across the floor, her nervous energy evident in every movement. Marcus answered cautiously. Hello? Is this Marcus Thompson? The voice was soft, feminine, with a slight tremor that spoke of carefully controlled emotion. Yes, this is Marcus. This is Elena Santos, Elena Martinez Santos now. I wrote to Isabella. Marcus felt his breath catch. Beside him, Isabella had gone completely still, her eyes wide as she watched his face for any sign of what was happening. Elena, Marcus said gently, thank you for your letter. Isabella was overjoyed to hear from you. There was a pause, and Marcus could hear Elena taking a shaky breath. Is she there? Could I Would it be possible to speak with her? Marcus looked at Isabella, who was nodding so vigorously he worried she might hurt her neck. "She's right here. Hold on." Isabella took the phone with reverent care, as if it might break in her hands. "Mama Elena?" What followed was a conversation that would stay with Marcus forever. Isabella's voice grew stronger with each word. 11. Years of questions pouring out in a rush of excitement and wonder. Elena's responses, which Marcus could hear faintly through the phone, were patient and loving, filled with the kind of maternal warmth that Isabella had been missing without even realizing it. They talked for over an hour. Elena told Isabella about her new life in Crescent Lake, about her husband Robert, who worked as a park ranger, about the small house by the lake where she taught piano lessons to local children. Isabella shared stories about Marcus, about her gift for finding lost things, about school and friends and all the small details that make up a life. When Isabella finally handed the phone back to Marcus, her cheeks were flushed with happiness. "She wants to meet us next weekend," she whispered. "She's going to drive here." Marcus took the phone, his own emotions churning. "Elena, thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for giving her such a beautiful life. I can hear it in her voice. She's confident and happy and loved. That's all I ever wanted for her." "She's an amazing kid," Marcus replied. "You should be proud of who she's becoming." "I am. And Marcus, there's something I need to tell you, something I couldn't put in the letter. My husband Robert, he's been encouraging me to reach out to Isabella for months. He lost his own mother when he was young, and he knows how important these connections are, but there's more to it than that." Marcus waited, sensing there was something significant coming. "Robert's last name is Chen, but before you worry, he's David's older brother." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Isabella's birth mother had married the brother of the man she'd been running from. The situation was more complicated than he could have imagined. "I know how that sounds," Elena continued quickly, "but Robert is nothing like David. He's the one who helped me escape from David in the first place. He'd been trying to get his brother help for years, trying to make him see what he was becoming. When David started hurting me, Robert was the one who gave me money to leave town, who helped me disappear." Marcus tried to process this information. "Does David know about the marriage?" "No. Robert and I were very careful. We met again by chance. 3 years ago in Bend, I was working at a bookstore. He was there for a forestry conference. We recognized each other immediately, but we didn't start a relationship until Robert was certain David was going to prison for a long time. Then we kept it quiet. We were married by a justice of the peace with just 2 witnesses. Isabella tugged on Marcus's sleeve, clearly frustrated at being left out of the conversation. Marcus put the phone on speaker so she could hear. "The reason I'm telling you this," Elena continued, "is because Robert has been searching for Isabella, too, in his own way. He's felt responsible for what David did, for the fear that drove me to give up my daughter. He wants to meet Isabella, to apologize for his family's role in our separation." Isabella spoke up, her voice curious rather than concerned. "Is he nice, your husband?" Elena's laugh was warm and genuine. "He's the kindest man I've ever known. Sweetheart, he builds houses for families who lost their homes in wildfires, and he volunteers at the animal shelter every weekend. He's already planned to stay at a hotel when we visit, so you won't feel overwhelmed meeting both of us at once." The conversation ended with plans for Eleanor to drive to Millbrook the following Saturday. She would arrive in the morning and stay until Sunday afternoon, giving them time to get reacquainted without rushing. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation and emotion. Isabella cleaned her room 3 times, practiced playing the piano pieces she'd learned over the years, and made a scrapbook of her life to show Elena. Marcus found himself equally nervous, uncertain about his role in this reunion. He was Isabella's father in every way that mattered, But Elena's return brought up complex feelings about identity, belonging, and what it meant to be a family. Jake Brennan called midweek with additional information about Robert Chen. His background. Czech had revealed a man with an impeccable reputation, no criminal record, active in community service, respected by colleagues and neighbors. More importantly, Jake had found evidence that Robert had indeed been trying to help his brother's victims for years, often anonymously paying for counseling services or relocation expenses. "He's clean, Marcus," Jake reported. "More than clean. He's one of the good guys. The kind of person who spends his life trying to make up for the damage other people cause." Saturday morning arrived grey and drizzly, typical for Oregon in December. Isabella had been awake since dawn, changing clothes twice and rearranging her scrapbook for the 10th time. Marcus made her favorite breakfast, pancakes with blueberries, but she was too nervous to eat more than a few bites. At exactly 10 o'clock, a silver Honda Civic pulled into their driveway. Marcus watched from the window as a woman got out, moving slowly as if she too was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Elena Martinez Santos looked older than in the photographs they'd found, but she was unmistakably the same person. Her dark hair was shorter now, swept back in a simple style, and she wore a deep purple sweater over dark jeans. Isabella pressed herself against Marcus's side, suddenly shy. What if she doesn't like me? What if I'm different from what she remembered? "She's going to love you," Marcus assured her. "How could she not?" The knock on the door was soft, hesitant. Marcus opened it to find Elena standing on his porch, tears already streaming down her face. She looked past him to Isabella, who had stepped out from behind Marcus, but remained close to his side. "Oh, my beautiful girl," Elena whispered. "Look how you've grown." Isabella took a tentative step forward, then another. Elena knelt down, opening her arms, and Isabella walked into them as if she'd been doing it her whole life. Marcus had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed by the emotion of watching his daughter reconnect with the woman who had given her life. The initial reunion was awkward, but warm. They sat in the living room, Eleanor on the couch with Isabella beside her, Marcus in his favorite armchair, trying to navigate his role in this delicate situation. Eleanor couldn't stop touching Isabella, stroking her hair, holding her hand, studying. Her face as if memorizing every detail. "You have my mother's nose," Elena said softly, "and your grandfather's stubborn chin. But your smile, that's all your own." Isabella showed Elena her scrapbook, narrating each page with the enthusiasm of someone sharing their life's work. Elena listened intently, asking questions about Isabella's friends, her favorite subjects in school, her gift for finding lost things. "I used to do that too," Elena revealed. "When I was your age, I could always find things that other people lost. My grandmother said it was a gift that ran in our family, that we could see connections other people missed." As the day progressed, the conversation became more natural. Elena shared stories about her childhood, about Isabella's grandparents, who had died before Isabella was born, about family traditions and recipes and the small details that help a person understand where they come from. It was during lunch that Elena brought up the subject they'd all been dancing around. "Isabella, I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I also need you to understand why it was necessary." Isabella set down her sandwich and looked directly at Elena. "Because of David Chen, because he was hurting you and would have hurt me too." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. "You know about David?" "Mr. Brennan told us about the police reports and everything," Isabella explained matter-of-factly. "I know you were scared and had to protect me. I'm not mad about it." Marcus watched Elena's composure crumble as she realized that Isabella not only understood her choice, but had forgiven her for it. "You're so much wiser than I was at your age." Elena said through her tears. "I had a good dad to teach me," Isabella replied, looking at Marcus with such love and gratitude that he felt his own eyes fill with tears. Elena followed Isabella's gaze and looked at Marcus with an expression of pure gratitude. "I chose well when I left her at St. Matthew's. Father Rodriguez told me that if someone was meant to find her, they would. I'm so grateful it was you." The afternoon brought more revelations. Eleanor told them about her years in hiding, about the constant fear and loneliness, about the jobs she'd taken and the friends she'd made along the way. She also talked about Robert, about how their relationship had developed slowly from friendship to love, built on shared understanding of loss and the desire to create something better from difficult circumstances. "He wanted to come today," Elena explained, "but he thought it might be too much. He's staying at the Millbrook Inn, waiting to hear how things go. He's more nervous than I am, if you can believe that." Isabella surprised them both with her next question. "Does he want to have kids with you?" Elena blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. "We've talked about it. He would love to be a father, but we also know that nothing could ever replace you in my heart. You'll always be my first child, my most precious gift." As evening approached, Elena reluctantly prepared to leave for her hotel. She would return the next morning for breakfast before driving back to Crescent Lake, but the first goodbye was emotional for everyone. "Will you come visit us?" Eleanor asked as she hugged Isabella goodbye. "Robert has been fixing up the guest room, hoping that someday you might want to see where I live now." Isabella looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "Could we, Daddy? Maybe for a weekend?" "We'll work something out," Marcus promised. As Eleanor's car disappeared down Cedar Street, Isabella waved until the taillights were no longer visible. Then she turned to Marcus with an expression of complete contentment. "I found her, Daddy. I finally found the most important lost thing of all." That night, as Marcus tucked Isabella into bed, she made an observation that would prove more prophetic than either of them realized. "You know what's funny, Daddy? Mama Elena found something she lost too. She found me. But I think maybe there's still something else we're all supposed to find together. Something we don't even know is missing yet." Marcus kissed her forehead and turned off the light, but Isabella's words stayed with him long into the night. In trying to help his daughter find her birth mother, he had opened a door to possibilities he hadn't considered. The story that had begun with a baby left at a church was evolving into something much more complex and beautiful than any of them had anticipated. 3 weeks after Eleanor's visit, Marcus found himself standing in the guest bedroom of a cozy lakeside cabin in Crescent Lake, watching Isabella arrange her overnight bag with the meticulous care she brought to everything important in her life. This was their first visit to Elena's new home, and the anticipation had been building for days. The drive through the Cascade Mountains had been spectacular, with snow-capped peaks reflecting in crystal-clear lakes. Isabella had spent most of the journey pressed against the passenger window, marveling at scenery that seemed straight out of a postcard. But as they turned down the gravel road leading to Elena's house, her excitement gave way to nervous energy. Elena and Robert were waiting on the front porch of a modest log cabin surrounded by towering pine trees. Elena looked radiant in the late afternoon sunlight, her face glowing with happiness at seeing Isabella again. Beside her stood a tall man with kind eyes and prematurely grey hair, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. Robert Chen was nothing like what Marcus had expected from David's brother. Where David had been aggressive and controlling based on the police reports, Robert possessed a quiet strength that reminded Marcus of the older trees in his workshop, steady, reliable, built to weather any storm. "You must be Isabella," Robert said as they approached the porch, his voice gentle but clearly nervous. "I'm Robert. I've heard so much about you." Isabella studied him with the same intensity she brought to her lost item searches, tilting her head slightly as if listening for something only she could hear. After a moment that felt much longer than it actually was, she smiled. "You have nice eyes. They're like Daddy Marcus's eyes, kind ones." The tension in Robert's shoulders visibly relaxed. "Thank you. That's quite a compliment." Elena showed them through the cabin, which was warm and inviting with handmade furniture that Robert had crafted himself. The living room featured a stone fireplace and walls lined with bookshelves, while the kitchen opened onto a deck overlooking the lake. But it was the piano in the corner that captured Isabella's attention immediately. "Do you still play, Isabella?" asked Elena, running her fingers reverently over the keys. "Every day," Elena replied. "Would you like me to teach you the song I used to play when you were a baby? I used to sing it to you before you were born." Isabella nodded eagerly, and soon the cabin was filled with the gentle melody of a Spanish lullaby that Elena's grandmother had taught her decades earlier. Isabella picked up the tune quickly, her small fingers finding the right keys with surprising accuracy. "You have musical talent," Robert observed, settling into a chair nearby. "That's another gift from your mother's side of the family." As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself genuinely liking Robert. The man was thoughtful and attentive without being overbearing, and he had a way of asking questions that showed he was truly interested in the answers. More importantly, he seemed to understand the delicate balance of this new family dynamic, never trying to insert himself where he didn't belong, while still making it clear that he cared deeply about both Elena and Isabella. Dinner was a relaxed affair, with Elena having prepared Isabella's favorite foods based on information from their phone conversations. They ate by candlelight, sharing stories and getting to know each other in the unhurried way that only comes when there's no pressure to impress anyone. It was during dessert that Robert brought up something that would change the direction of their entire weekend. "Isabella, your mother told me about your gift for finding lost things. I was wondering if you might be able to help me with something that's been troubling me for years." Isabella set down her spoon and gave Robert her full attention. "What kind of lost thing?" Robert glanced at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. "It's not a thing exactly. It's a person. My first wife, Margaret, she disappeared 8 years ago, and no one has been able to find any trace of her." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Robert had been married before. Elena hadn't mentioned this in any of their conversations. "She disappeared?" Isabella asked, her voice carrying the same serious tone she used when someone came to her for help with an important search. Robert nodded, his expression growing heavy with old grief. Margaret struggled with depression and anxiety. She'd been getting treatment and seemed to be doing better. Then one day, I came home from work and she was gone. No note, no explanation. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, but she was nowhere to be found. Elena reached over and took Robert's hand, clearly familiar with this story, but still moved by his pain. "The police searched for months," Robert continued. "They dragged the lake, combed through the forest, followed up on every lead. Her family hired a private investigator. We never found so much as a piece of clothing or a footprint. It was like she simply vanished into thin air." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "How old was she when she disappeared?" 34. We'd been married for 6 years. She was a teacher at the elementary school in town. What was she wearing when you saw her last?" Robert's eyes grew distant as he recalled that final morning. A blue sundress with small white flowers. It was her favorite, and she always wore this silver bracelet with a heart charm that her grandmother had given her. Isabella nodded, processing this information in the methodical way she approached all her searches. "Can I see her picture?" Robert pulled out his wallet and withdrew a photograph that had clearly been handled many times. It showed a woman with Auburn hair and a bright smile, standing next to a vegetable garden with mountains in the background. Isabella studied the photograph intently, then looked up at Robert with an expression that was both mature and compassionate. "I can try to help, but finding people is different from finding things. People can choose to stay lost." "I understand," Robert said. "I just need to know what happened to her. The not knowing is the hardest part." The next morning, Isabella announced that she wanted to visit the places that had been important to Margaret. Robert drove them first to the elementary school where Margaret had taught, then to her favorite hiking trail, and finally to the small cemetery where her grandparents were buried. At each location, Isabella walked slowly, sometimes closing her eyes and standing very still. Marcus had seen her do this countless times when searching for lost objects, but watching her try to connect with a missing person was different, more intense, more emotionally charged. It was at the cemetery that Isabella made her first significant observation. She had been standing quietly beside Margaret's grandparents' headstone when she suddenly looked up at Robert with a startled expression. "She came here," Isabella said with certainty. "The day she disappeared, she came here. She left something." Robert's face went pale. "The police searched this cemetery. They didn't find anything." Isabella shook her head. "Not on top of the ground, under it. She buried something here. With Robert's permission, they contacted the cemetery caretaker, who agreed to let them use a metal detector on the grounds. It took nearly an hour of systematic searching. But finally the detector beeped insistently near the base of an old oak tree about 20 feet from the grandparents' grave. Digging carefully with a small garden spade, they found a metal box buried, about 18 inches down. Inside was a letter addressed to Robert, along with Margaret's silver bracelet and a small collection of items that had clearly held special meaning for her. Robert's hands shook as he opened the letter, written in Margaret's familiar handwriting. As he read silently, tears began streaming down his face. Elena put her arm around his shoulders, while Isabella and Marcus waited respectfully. "She didn't kill herself," Robert said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "She explains everything in the letter. She had been having what she calls episodes, times when she would completely lose track of who she was, where she was, even what year it was. She was terrified that she was developing early-onset dementia like her father had." He looked up at them, his face a mixture of relief and renewed grief. "She buried this the day she left because she wanted me to find it eventually, but only after she was sure she could never hurt me by staying. She was planning to check herself into a specialized facility, somewhere she could get help without endangering anyone else." Isabella spoke up quietly. "Is she still alive?" Robert wiped his eyes and looked at the letter again. "She mentions looking into a place called Riverside Memory Care Center in Northern California. She says if anyone ever finds this letter, they should know that she chose to leave out of love, not desperation." The drive back to Elena's cabin was subdued, everyone processing the emotional weight of what they'd discovered. But Isabella wasn't finished. That evening, as they sat around the fireplace, she made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I think I can find her, Margaret. If she's still alive, if she's still at that place, I think I can find her." Robert looked at Isabella with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Sweetheart, that was 8 years ago. Even if she went to that facility, she might not still be there." "But I could try," Isabella insisted. "You helped Mama Elena escape from your brother. You saved her life. Maybe I'm supposed to help you find Margaret. Maybe that's why we all found each other." Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. Isabella's logic was compelling, but the emotional risks were enormous. If Margaret was alive but didn't want to be found, or if she had deteriorated to the point where she couldn't recognize Robert, the reunion could be devastating for everyone involved. "It would be complicated," Marcus said carefully. "Even if we located her, There would be legal and medical issues to consider. After 8 years, she might not want contact with her previous life. Isabella nodded, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. But don't you think she deserves to know that Robert still loves her? That he's been looking for her all this time? And don't you think Robert deserves to know if she's okay? The wisdom in Isabella's words was undeniable. That night, after Isabella had gone to bed, the 3 adults sat on the deck overlooking the lake and discussed the possibility of searching for Margaret. "I've thought about trying to find her countless times," Robert admitted, "but I was always afraid that if she had chosen to disappear, trying to track her down would be a violation of her wishes. But now we know she left out of love, not rejection." Elena pointed out, "The letter changes everything. She wanted you to understand her choice, which suggests she might want contact if circumstances were different." Marcus found himself thinking about his own journey with Isabella, how the search for Elena had brought healing and completion to their family. If Isabella is willing to try, and if you're prepared for whatever we might find, then maybe we should at least investigate. Robert was quiet for a long time, staring out at the moonlight dancing on the water. Finally he spoke. 8 years ago, I made a vow to love Margaret in sickness and in health. I failed that vow when I let her disappear without fighting for her. If there's a chance to honor it now, to show her that love doesn't disappear just because someone is struggling, then I have to take it." Elena squeezed his hand. "We'll take it, all of us, together." As they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore, Marcus realized that Isabella had been right about there being something else they were all supposed to find together. The search for Margaret wouldn't just be about reuniting her with Robert. It would be about proving that families, even unconventional ones like theirs, could be powerful forces for healing when they worked together. The next morning, as they prepared to return to Millbrook, Isabella made one final observation that would guide their next steps. "I keep thinking about Margaret's bracelet," she said thoughtfully. "She buried it with the letter because she wanted Robert to have it back, but I think she also wanted him to know that she never stopped thinking about their connection. People don't bury things they want to forget. They bury things they want to preserve." Robert smiled, the first genuinely hopeful expression he'd worn since finding the letter. "Then let's help her preserve what really matters, the love she was trying to protect." Jake Brennan arrived at Marcus's workshop on a Tuesday morning, carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the expression of someone who had spent weeks chasing shadows. The private investigator had agreed to help search for Margaret Chen, but his initial findings were far from encouraging. Riverside Memory Care Center closed down 5 years ago, Jake announced without preamble, settling into the wooden chair. Marcus kept for clients. Financial difficulties, the patients were transferred to various facilities throughout California and Nevada. Isabella, who had been helping Marcus sand a cabinet door, immediately stopped working and gave Jake her full attention. Did they keep records of where everyone went? Jake opened his folder and pulled out several photocopied documents. That's where it gets complicated. The facility's closure was messy. Bankruptcy, lawsuits, regulatory violations. Most of the records were sealed by the court, and what wasn't sealed has been scattered among different agencies. Marcus set down his plane and wiped his hands on his work apron. But there must be some trail to follow. There is, but it's going to take time and probably some legal maneuvering, Jake replied. I did find one lead, though. A former nurse from Riverside named Patricia Wong now works at Sunset Manor in Sacramento. She agreed to meet with us, but she can't officially discuss specific patients without proper authorization. Isabella perked up at this news. When can we talk to her? This weekend, if you're willing to make the drive. But I want you to understand something, Isabella. Even if we find Margaret, she might not be the same person Robert remembers. Memory disorders can be progressive, and 8 years is a long time. Isabella nodded solemnly. But we still have to try. Robert deserves to know what happened to her, and Margaret deserves to know that someone never stopped caring. The drive to Sacramento took 6 hours, with Jake navigating while Marcus drove and Isabella studied every piece of information they had about Margaret. She had created a new notebook specifically for this search, filling it with details about Margaret's life, her teaching career, her family connections, and anything else that might be relevant. Patricia Wong met them at a small cafe near Sunset Manor, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades caring for people with diminishing memories. She listened carefully as Jake explained their situation, occasionally glancing at Isabella with curiosity. "I remember Margaret Chen," Patricia said finally. "She was admitted to Riverside under a different name, Margaret Santos. She'd legally changed her surname, probably to make it harder for people to find her." Isabella leaned forward eagerly. "What was she like?" Patricia's expression softened. "Frightened, mostly. She'd been diagnosed with early-stage frontotemporal dementia, which can cause dramatic personality changes and memory loss. But she was also incredibly brave. She'd checked herself in voluntarily, which takes tremendous courage." "Do you know where she went when Riverside closed?" Marcus asked. "That's where things get difficult," Patricia admitted. Margaret's case was complicated because she had no family contacts on file and no one had visited her in the 3 years she was with us. When the facility closed, she was transferred to a state-run facility in Nevada. Jake pulled out a notepad. "Do you remember—" "Which one?" "Silver Springs Care Center, about an hour outside of Reno. But that was 5 years ago. I have no idea if she's still there or even—" Patricia's voice trailed off, the implication clear. Isabella spoke up, her voice steady despite the weight. "Of what they were learning. Is there any way to find out without alerting her that someone's looking for her? In case she still doesn't want to be found." Patricia looked impressed by Isabella's thoughtfulness. "Actually, yes. I still have contacts throughout the system. I could make some inquiries, see if Margaret Santos is still at Silver Springs or if she's been transferred elsewhere." They agreed to wait while Patricia made her calls. Jake treated Isabella to ice cream while Marcus paced nervously outside the cafe, all of them trying to manage their expectations. An hour later, Patricia emerged with news that was both encouraging and heartbreaking. "Margaret is alive," she announced, "but she's no longer at Silver Springs. She was transferred 18 months ago to a specialized memory care facility called Haven Valley, about 2 hours north of here. Her condition has progressed, but she's stable and receiving good care." Isabella pumped her fist in triumph. "We found her!" "Finding her and reuniting her with Robert are 2 very different things," Patricia cautioned gently. "Memory care facilities have strict protocols about visitors, especially for patients who've been there as long as Margaret has. You'll need to work with the staff to determine if contact would be beneficial or harmful." The drive to Haven Valley took them through rolling hills, dotted with vineyards and small farming communities. Isabella spent most of the journey on her phone with Elena, excitedly sharing their progress, while Marcus and Jake discussed the delicate process of approaching the facility. Haven Valley turned out to be a modern complex, surrounded by gardens and walking paths designed to look more like a retirement resort than a medical facility. The staff was professional but cautious when Jake explained their situation to the admissions director, Dr. Amanda Fletcher. "Margaret Santos has been with us for over a year," Dr. Fletcher explained in her office, overlooking the facility's central courtyard. "She's adjusted well to our community, but her condition has progressed significantly. She has good days and difficult days, and she doesn't often remember details from her life before her diagnosis." Isabella had been sitting quietly, but now she spoke up. Does she ever talk about her husband or ask about people from her past? Dr. Fletcher looked surprised by the question's directness, but she considered it carefully. Actually, yes. She often mentions someone named Robert. She becomes agitated sometimes, saying she needs to get home to Robert, that he'll be worried about her. We've always assumed Robert was a figure from her distant past, perhaps a childhood friend or relative. Marcus felt his heart clench at the thought of Margaret spending years worrying about Robert while having no way to contact him. Would it be possible for us to see her? Not to identify ourselves, just to observe and see if there's any recognition. That's highly irregular, Dr. Fletcher replied. Our patient's privacy is paramount. Jake leaned forward. What if we told you that Robert has been searching for Margaret for 8 years, that he never stopped loving her, never gave up hope? What if we could prove that Margaret chose to disappear not because she wanted to leave him, but because she was trying to protect him? Dr. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing professional protocols against human compassion. If you can provide documentation that supports your claims, I might be able to arrange a very brief, supervised observation. But any decision about actual contact would require extensive consultation with our medical team and potentially Margaret's court-appointed guardian. That evening, in their hotel room in the nearby town of Willowbrook, the three of them video-called Robert and Eleanor to share their discovery. Robert's face on the laptop screen showed a mixture of joy, relief, and terror at the news that Margaret was alive and relatively well. I want to see her, Robert said immediately. I don't care about protocols or procedures. She's my wife. Eleanor, sitting beside Robert in their kitchen, placed a calming hand on his arm. But we have to think about what's best for Margaret. If seeing you causes her distress or confusion, it could set back her care. Isabella had been listening to this exchange with growing frustration. Finally, she interrupted. What if I visited her first? By myself? I could just be a regular visitor. Maybe say I'm a student doing a project about teachers or something. I could see how she reacts to hearing Robert's name, whether she seems like she wants to reconnect with her past. Marcus shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. You're 11 years old, Isabella. I'm not sending you into a memory care facility to manipulate a vulnerable person. I wouldn't manipulate her, Isabella protested. I just talk to her. I'm good at talking to people, and I might be able to tell if she's happy where she is or if she's lonely for her old life. The debate continued for another hour, with everyone agreeing that they wanted what was best for Margaret while disagreeing about how to determine what that might be. Finally, Jake suggested a compromise. What if Isabella and I visit together? I could pose as a researcher studying the long-term effects of early intervention in dementia cases, and Isabella could be my assistant. It would give us a legitimate reason to interact with Margaret while keeping the conversation general enough not to cause distress. Dr. Fletcher agreed to this arrangement after reviewing Jake's investigator credentials and Marcus signing extensive liability waivers. The visit was scheduled for the following afternoon, with strict guidelines about topics to avoid and protocols to follow if Margaret became agitated. Isabella spent the morning preparing, reading everything she could find about frontotemporal dementia and practicing casual conversation starters that might reveal information about Margaret's current state of mind without triggering painful memories. Haven Valley's activity room was filled with natural light and comfortable seating areas, where residents could engage in various programs throughout the day. Margaret was sitting near a window, working on a jigsaw puzzle that showed a mountain landscape. She looked older than in Robert's photograph, her auburn hair now streaked with grey, but her concentration on the puzzle was absolute. Mrs. Santos? Jake approached with the respectful tone he'd use with any interview subject. I'm James Brennan, and this is my research assistant, Isabella. We're conducting a study about memory and personal connections. Would you mind if we asked you a few questions? Margaret looked up with curious eyes that held flashes of the intelligence Robert had described. Of course. I like talking to people. Are you students? Isabella sat down beside Margaret, immediately drawn to the puzzle. This is beautiful. Do you like landscapes? Oh, yes, Margaret replied, her face lighting up. My husband and I used to go hiking all the time. He knew all the best trails, all the secret places where wildflowers grew. Her expression suddenly clouded. I don't know where he is now. I keep thinking I should call him, but I can't remember his number. Isabella felt her heart constrict. What's your husband's name? Robert, Margaret said without hesitation. Robert Chen. He builds things. With his hands. Beautiful things. He has the kindest eyes. She paused, looking confused. But I don't know why I can't find him. Did something happen? Did I do something wrong? Jake and Isabella exchanged glances. Margaret's memory of Robert was vivid and loving, but she seemed to have no recollection of her decision to leave or the years that had passed since then. I'm sure you didn't do anything wrong, Isabella said gently. Sometimes people get separated, but that doesn't mean they stopped caring about each other. Margaret nodded, seeming relieved by this reassurance. He used to sing to me when I had bad dreams, old folk songs his grandmother taught him. I miss his voice. Isabella spent another 20 minutes with Margaret, learning about her memories of teaching, her love of gardens, and her persistent worry about Robert. When they finally said goodbye, Margaret asked Isabella to come back soon. I don't get many visitors, Margaret explained, and you remind me of someone, though I can't quite remember who. Walking back to their car, Isabella was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she'd observed. Finally, she looked up at Jake with determination in her eyes. She still loves him. She's not scared of him or angry at him. She's just lost and confused about why they're apart. And Jake, I think she's ready to be found. 6 months after the reunion at Haven Valley, Isabella stood in the workshop that had become the heart of their extended family's gathering place. Marcus was teaching Robert advanced joinery techniques, while Elena and Margaret's sister Carmen planned the details of what would become a monthly tradition, family visits that brought everyone together at the lake house. Carmen Rodriguez had been the final surprise in their story. Margaret's younger sister had been searching for her missing sibling for nearly as long as Robert had, following dead ends and false leads across 3 states. She had contacted Haven Valley just 2 weeks after Robert's first visit, having finally traced Margaret's legal name change through court records in Nevada. The reunion between the sisters had been different from Margaret's meeting with Robert, more emotional, more complicated, filled with Carmen's guilt over not finding Margaret sooner and Margaret's innocent confusion about why everyone seemed so worried about time that had passed. But like all the other connections their family had helped forge, it had ultimately been healing for everyone involved. Isabella, can you hand me that chisel? Marcus called from across the workshop, where he and Robert were working on a custom rocking chair for Margaret's room at Haven Valley. Isabella retrieved the tool, but paused to admire their work. The chair was beautiful, crafted from cherry, wood with delicate leaf patterns carved into the headrest. More importantly, it was built to accommodate Margaret's physical needs while honoring her love of nature and growing things. She's going to love it, Isabella said, running her fingers along the smooth armrest. Robert looked up from his careful measuring, his face reflecting the peace that had settled over him since reconnecting with Margaret. I hope so. Dr. Fletcher thinks having familiar objects around her might help anchor her on difficult days. The workshop had evolved over the past months into something Marcus had never planned, a place where broken things weren't just repaired, but where broken people found ways to heal together. Robert visited twice a week, sometimes working on furniture for the facility, sometimes just learning new techniques that helped quiet his mind. Elena came whenever she could, bringing lunch and stories from her piano students. Even Jake Brennan had become a regular presence, not as an investigator, but as someone who had found an unexpected family in the process of helping others find theirs. He was currently in the corner of the workshop, attempting to build a simple birdhouse under Marcus's patient guidance, his detective skills proving less transferable to woodworking than he'd hoped. The most remarkable transformation, however, had been in Isabella herself. The girl who had spent her childhood searching for lost objects had discovered something even more valuable: the ability to help people find their way back to each other. Word of her role in reuniting families had spread quietly through their community, and people began coming to her with different kinds of missing pieces. Mrs. Patterson had asked for help finding her estranged daughter. The Kowalski family needed assistance locating elderly relatives they'd lost touch with during immigration. Even Father Rodriguez had consulted Isabella about parishioners who had drifted away from the church during difficult times. Isabella approached each case with the same methodical care she'd always used for lost objects, but her methods had evolved. She understood now that finding people required more than intuition. It required empathy, patience, and a deep respect for the reasons people sometimes chose to stay lost. The Hendersons called again this morning, Elena mentioned as she arranged. Wildflowers in a mason jar, transforming the utilitarian workshop into something warmer. Their son Timothy still hasn't responded to the letters you helped them write. Isabella nodded thoughtfully. Timothy Henderson had been estranged from his parents for 5 years following a bitter argument about his career choices. Isabella had helped track him down to a small town in Montana where he worked as a forest ranger, but establishing contact had proven more challenging than simply locating him. People aren't like keys or jewelry, Isabella mused, echoing a lesson she'd learned through experience. When objects are lost, they want to be found. When people are lost, sometimes they need time to want to be found. Marcus smiled at his daughter's wisdom. At 12 years old, Isabella had developed insights about human nature that many adults never achieved. But more importantly, she had learned to balance her gift with kindness, to understand that not every search should end in reunion. The afternoon was interrupted by the arrival of Carmen, who burst into the workshop with uncharacteristic excitement. Margaret's sister was usually composed and practical, but today she was practically vibrating with energy. "You'll never believe what happened," Carmen announced, setting down a folder thick with documents. "I've been going through Margaret's old papers, the ones the storage company saved when her apartment was cleaned out. Look what I found." She pulled out a sealed envelope with "For Robert" written across the front in Margaret's handwriting. Unlike the letter they'd found buried at the cemetery, this one was thick, clearly containing multiple pages. Robert's hands shook as he opened the envelope and began reading the contents aloud. It was a love letter, written during the early stages of Margaret's diagnosis when her memories were still intact, but her future was becoming clear. "My dearest Robert," he read, his voice growing stronger with each word. "If you're reading this, it means my plan worked and you found the first letter I buried. I hope you understand now why I had to leave, but there are things I need you to know about the time we had together." The letter continued for several pages, filled with specific memories of their marriage, expressions of gratitude for Robert's love and patience, and detailed instructions for how she wanted him to live his life after she was gone. Most remarkably, it contained Margaret's blessing for him to find love again. "I know you, my stubborn, loyal husband," Robert read through tears. "You'll probably spend years thinking you owe me a faithfulness that ignores your own needs. But love isn't finite, Robert. Loving someone new doesn't diminish what we had together. Please don't let my illness steal your future happiness." Elena moved to Robert's side, wrapping her arms around him as he struggled to continue reading. The letter concluded with Margaret's hope that Robert would help other people find their way back to love, that their story would somehow inspire healing in others. Isabella listened to the letter with growing amazement. Even in the midst of her own crisis, Margaret had been thinking about other people's happiness, planning for connections that wouldn't happen for years. It was exactly the kind of gift that Isabella was learning to recognize, love that extended beyond immediate circumstances to touch lives in unexpected ways. That evening, as the extended family gathered around Elena and Robert's dinner table, Isabella made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to start something new," she said, setting down her fork and looking around the table with the serious expression she wore when she had fully thought through an idea. "Not just helping people find lost things or lost people. I want to help families who are broken figure out how to fit back together." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Like family counseling?" Elena asked. Isabella shook her head. "Not exactly. More like family archaeology, helping people dig up the good stuff that got buried under arguments and hurt feelings and misunderstandings, helping them remember why they loved each other in the first place." Carmen leaned forward, intrigued. "How would something like that work?" "Well," Isabella began, clearly having thought this through, "lots of families break apart because people stop talking to each other. But usually the love is still there underneath all the angry words. If someone could help them find that love again, maybe they could build something new on top of it." Robert nodded slowly. "Like rebuilding a house on a foundation that's still solid." "Exactly," Isabella said, pleased that he understood. "And I think our family proves it works. We're not traditional, but we fit together because we all decided that caring about each other was more important than being perfect." Jake, who had been quietly eating while listening to the conversation, suddenly spoke up. "You know, kid, there might be something to that idea. In my line of work, I see a lot of families that have been torn apart by secrets or misunderstandings. If there was someone who specialized in healing those rifts instead of just investigating them, the idea took root around that dinner table, growing and evolving as each person contributed their perspective. Elena suggested partnering with local churches and community centers. Marcus offered his workshop as a meeting space where people could work with their hands while talking through difficult emotions. Robert proposed collaborating with counselors and social workers who understood the professional aspects of family and therapy. By the end of the evening, they had outlined the basics of what would become the Lost and Found Family Services, a non-profit organization dedicated to reuniting families and healing relationships. Isabella would be the youngest member of the team, but her role would be central, using her unique gift for seeing connections to help identify the underlying bonds that could support reconciliation. 3 months later, Isabella stood once again in St. Matthew's Chapel, but this time she wasn't searching for answers about her own past. She was there for the dedication ceremony of a memorial garden created in honor of families who had been separated by circumstances beyond their control. Father Rodriguez had aged in the years since Isabella's adoption, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had led him to care for an abandoned baby on a stormy night. As he blessed the garden, Isabella reflected on how many lives had been touched by that single act of compassion. Margaret's sister Carmen had funded the garden project, working with the church to create a space where people could come to remember lost connections and pray for healing. The centerpiece was a small fountain surrounded by benches, with plaques honoring families affected by war, natural disasters, illness, and other tragedies that scattered loved ones. But Isabella's favorite part of the garden was a simple wooden arbor that Robert had built, covered with climbing roses that would bloom in different colors throughout the seasons. Attached to the arbor was a bronze plaque with Margaret's words from her final letter: "Love isn't finite. Loving someone new doesn't diminish what we had together." As the ceremony concluded and people began to mingle in the garden, Isabella found herself standing beside the fountain with Marcus, both of them watching Eleanor help Margaret feed the goldfish that had been added to create a sense of life and movement in the space. Margaret's condition had continued to progress, but her capacity for joy remained unchanged. She delighted in simple pleasures: the feeling of cool water on her fingers, the bright colors of the fish, the sound of Elena's laughter. She rarely remembered people's names anymore, but she responded to kindness with the trusting openness of someone who lived entirely in the present moment. "Are you happy with how everything turned out?" Marcus asked Isabella, following her gaze to the small group gathered around the fountain. Isabella considered the question seriously. Their family looked nothing like what anyone might have planned. A single father and his adopted daughter, connected to a birth mother and her husband, united in caring for his first wife, who barely remembered any of them. It was complicated and unconventional, and sometimes heartbreaking. "I think Margaret was right about love not being finite," Isabella said finally. "We didn't lose anything by finding each other. We just got more." As if summoned by their conversation, Robert appeared beside them, having just finished helping Margaret to a bench where she could watch the fountain more comfortably. "She asked me to sing the Wildflower song again," he reported with a smile. "Third time today. I think she finds comfort in the repetition." Isabella nodded. Sometimes the best kind of finding isn't about discovering something new. Sometimes it's about rediscovering something you thought you'd lost forever. 6 months later, Isabella received a letter that would remind her why their work mattered. It was from Timothy Henderson, the estranged son in Montana whose family had been one of their first cases through Lost and Found Family Services. "Dear Isabella," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that I finally called my parents yesterday. It took me this long to realize that being right about our old argument was less important than being connected to people who love me. Thank you for helping me understand that I could come home without giving up who I've become." Isabella added Timothy's letter to the growing collection she kept in a special box in her room. Thank you notes from families who had found their way back to each other, wedding invitations from couples who had reconciled, birth announcements from people who wanted to share their joy with the family that had helped heal theirs. Each letter reminded her that the gift she'd discovered as a young child, the ability to find lost things, had evolved into something much more significant. She wasn't just helping people locate missing objects or missing relatives. She was helping them recover missing pieces of themselves, missing connections that made their lives whole. As Isabella looked out her bedroom window at the view of Cedar Street that had been home for as long as she could remember, she realized that their story had come full circle. It had begun with a baby left at a church, and it had led to a family that spent their time helping other people find their way home. Sometimes the most important discoveries weren't about where you came from, Isabella reflected, but about where you chose to go and who you chose to take with you on the journey. Their family had been built not on shared genetics or legal documents, but on the simple decision to keep finding each other over and over again, no matter how many times life tried to pull them apart. And in the end, that was the most valuable thing anyone could ever hope to find, a group of people who would never stop looking for you, no matter how lost you thought you were. 2 years after establishing Lost and Found Family Services, Isabella was sorting through donation boxes in the organization's small office when she discovered something that would unravel yet another mystery from their past. The office, located in a converted Victorian house on Main Street, had become a hub for family reunification efforts throughout the Pacific Northwest. Isabella had grown into her role as the organization's youngest consultant, now 14, and possessed of an uncanny ability to read between the lines of family disputes. She worked primarily with teenagers and young adults who had been estranged from their parents, understanding their perspective in ways that surprised even experienced counselors. The donation box she was examining had come from the estate of Mrs. Dorothy Brennan, Jake's aunt, who had passed away the previous month. Most of the items were typical estate sale fare: books, kitchenware, old photographs. But buried at the bottom was a manila envelope marked St. Matthew's Chapel 2014 in spidery handwriting. Isabella's heart skipped as she recognized the date. 2014 was the year she had been found at the church. With trembling fingers she opened the envelope and found herself staring at a collection of photographs that took her breath away. The first photo showed a young woman sitting in the back pew of St. Matthew's Chapel, her long, dark hair partially obscuring her face as she bent over what appeared to be a prayer book. Even with the poor lighting and distant angle, Isabella immediately recognized Elena. But what made her gasp was the second figure in the photo, a man sitting 3 pews ahead, turned slightly as if he had been watching Elena. Isabella pulled out her phone and called Marcus, her voice shaking with excitement. "Dad, you need to get down to the office right now. I found something incredible." Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, followed closely by Elena and Robert, who had been visiting Margaret when Isabella's call came through. The 4 of them gathered around the small conference table as Isabella spread out the photographs. Mrs. Brennan was apparently something of an amateur photographer, Isabella explained, pointing to the timestamp on each photo. "Look at these dates. They're all from late 2013 and early 2014. She was documenting the regular churchgoers, probably for some kind of historical project. The photographs told a story none of them had known existed. Elena appeared in dozens of pictures, always sitting alone, always looking troubled. But in at least half of the photos, the same man appeared somewhere in the frame, sometimes sitting nearby, sometimes standing by the door, sometimes simply visible in the background. Elena picked up one of the clearer photographs, studying the man's face intently. "I don't understand. I don't remember anyone paying particular attention to me at church. I was always so careful to avoid eye contact, to not draw attention." Robert examined the photos with growing concern. "Eleanor, this man was following you. Look at the pattern. He's positioned where he could watch you in every single picture." Isabella had been thinking the same thing, but something about the man's posture in the photographs struck her as odd. "He doesn't look threatening, though. Look at his body language. He's not aggressive or predatory. He looks worried." Marcus took the photographs and studied them under the desk lamp. The man appeared to be in his 40s, well-dressed but not flashy, with the kind of weathered face that suggested outdoor work. Most notably, he looked genuinely concerned rather than menacing. "There's something else," Isabella said, pulling out the final item from the envelope. It was a handwritten note from Mrs. Brennan, dated just a few months before her death. "Listen to this. Found these old church photos while cleaning out my camera equipment. The young woman in the pictures reminds me of someone, but I can't place who. The man watching her seemed familiar too. Thought Father Rodriguez might want them for the church archives, but decided they might be too personal." Elena set down the photograph she'd been examining and looked around the table with growing unease. "What if David had someone watching? Me? What if he found out where I was going to church and hired someone to follow me?" "That would explain why you felt like you were being watched," Robert said grimly. "And why did you become even more frightened toward the end of your pregnancy?" Isabella studied the photographs again, but something still bothered her about their interpretation. If this man was working for David, why didn't he approach you or try to force you to go back? In all these pictures he maintains his distance. He's watching, but he's not acting. Jake arrived just as they were debating whether to take the photographs to the police. Isabella showed him the pictures, explaining their discovery and their concerns about Eleanor's safety during her pregnancy. Jake examined each photograph methodically, his investigator training evident in how he analyzed angles, lighting, and positioning. After several minutes, he looked up with an expression of surprise. "I don't think this man was working for David Chen," he announced. "I think he was trying to protect Elena." "What makes you say that?" Marcus asked. Jake pointed to one of the clearer photographs. "Look at his positioning. He's not hiding from Elena. He's hiding from the entrance. See how he always sits, where he can watch both Elena and anyone who might come through the main doors. That's protective surveillance, not predatory stalking." Elena leaned forward, studying the photograph Jake had indicated. "You think he was watching for David?" "I think someone who cared about your safety was keeping an eye on you," Jake replied. "The question is who?" Isabella had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up with the tone she used when pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. "Mrs. Brennan said the man looked familiar. What if he's someone from Millbrook, someone local who knew Elena was in trouble?" The possibility sent them in an entirely new direction. If the man in the photographs was from their community, someone might recognize him. Isabella suggested taking the clearest photo to local businesses, starting with places that had been operating since 2013. Their first stop was Patterson's Grocery, where Mrs. Patterson examined the photograph with the careful attention she brought to everything. "Oh my," she said after a moment, "that's Henry Walsh. He used to run the landscaping business before his son took over. But what would Henry be doing at St. Matthew's? He's been Baptist his whole life." Armed with a name, they drove to Walsh Landscaping on the outskirts of town. Henry Walsh Jr. confirmed that his father had indeed been photographed at St. Matthew's, but he seemed puzzled by their interest. "Dad's been dead 3 years now," Henry Jr. explained. "Heart attack while he was working in his garden. But yeah, he did go to different churches sometimes, said he liked seeing how other people worshipped," Isabella pressed gently. "Did he ever mention a young woman he was worried about? Someone he might have been trying to help?" Henry Jr.'s expression grew thoughtful. "You know, there was something. The last year or so before he died, Dad seemed really bothered by something. He kept talking about someone he should have helped. More, someone he'd failed. They asked to see Henry Sr.'s personal effects, anything that might explain his connection to Elena." In the small office behind the landscaping supply store, Henry Jr. showed them a box of his father's papers, receipts, business correspondence, and personal notebooks. Isabella found what they were looking for in one of the notebooks. A daily planner from 2014. Scattered throughout the calendar were cryptic notes. "Check on girl at St. M's. Still no sign of trouble. Girl looking more worried." But it was an entry from March 2014 that provided the breakthrough they needed. "Followed girl home. Lives near the Martinez place on Elm Street. Reminds me so much of little Maria," Elena gasped. "Maria Martinez was my cousin. She lived on Elm Street with her family when I was a teenager." The pieces began falling into place. Henry Walsh Sr. had known Elena's family, had probably watched Elena grow up around the neighborhood. When he saw her at church, pregnant and frightened, he had recognized her and appointed himself as an unofficial guardian. Henry Jr. confirmed their theory when they shared Elena's identity. "Dad always felt terrible about what happened to the Martinez family," he explained. "There was a house fire when I was in high school. Maria and her parents died, but there was a younger cousin who survived. Dad helped with the cleanup, tried to track down the girl's relatives, but she disappeared before anyone could help her properly." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I ran away after the fire. I was 17, scared, had nowhere to go. I ended up in Portland, met David, thought I'd finally found stability. I had no idea anyone from home was trying to help me." The revelation that Henry Walsh had been quietly watching over Elena during her most vulnerable time added yet another layer to their family's complex history. Even when Elena had felt completely alone, someone who remembered her as a child had been trying to keep her safe. Isabella found herself deeply moved by Henry Walsh's anonymous kindness. He never approached you because he didn't want to scare you, but he also couldn't just ignore that you needed help. There's something else, Henry Jr. said, pulling out a small wooden box from his father's desk. Dad asked me to hold on to this. Said if anyone ever came looking for information about the girl he was watching, I should give them this. Inside the box were more photographs, but these were different. Older pictures of Elena as a child with her cousin Maria and the Martinez family. There was also a handwritten note from Henry Sr., dated just weeks before his death. If someone is reading this, the note began, it means the young woman I've been worried about has finally found people who care enough to look for answers. I never had the courage to approach her directly, but I want her to know that she was never as alone as she thought. Some of us remember Maria and her family with love, and we remember her too. Elena was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the discovery that even during her darkest period, she had been held in someone's thoughts and prayers. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders while Robert took her hand, their unconventional family, once again proving that love and care could come from the most unexpected sources. There's one more thing, Henry Jr. said softly. Dad left instructions that if anyone ever found the girl from the church, I should tell them about the trust fund. The room went silent. What trust fund? Jake asked. Henry Jr. looked slightly embarrassed. Dad set aside money every month for years, hoping someday he'd find a way to help Elena without making her feel like charity. It's not a huge amount, but it's been earning interest for over a decade. He wanted it to go toward helping her build a stable life. Isabella looked around the table at the faces of her family, seeing the same amazement she felt reflected in their expressions. Henry Walsh, a man Elena had never consciously met, had been not only protecting her, but saving money to help her, maintaining faith for years that someday he would find a way to make a difference in her life. How much money are we talking about? Elena asked quietly. Henry Jr. consulted a bank statement from the box. Just over $40,000. Dad was very specific about what it should be used for: education, stable housing, or helping other young people in similar situations. Elena looked at Isabella with eyes shining with possibility. Isabella, what would you think about using that money to expand lost and found family services? We could help more families, maybe even focus specifically on young people who've aged out of foster care or lost family connections. Isabella felt a familiar surge of excitement, the same feeling she'd always gotten when a particularly challenging search was about to reach its resolution. I think Henry Walsh would love knowing that his kindness is still helping people find their way home. As they drove back to town, with Henry Sr.'s photographs and documents, Isabella reflected on how their family story kept revealing new depths of connection and care. Every time they thought they understood their history completely, another layer appeared, showing them that they had been surrounded by love and protection even when they hadn't known it. It makes you wonder, Isabella said as they pulled into their driveway, how many other Henry Walshes are out there, quietly watching over people who think they're all alone. Marcus smiled at his daughter's insight. Maybe that's part of why our work matters so much. We're not just helping people find each other. We're helping them discover all the ways they were never really lost in the first place. 5 years had passed since the discovery of Henry Walsh's photographs, and the Lost and Found Family Services had grown from a small local organization into a regional network with offices in 3 states. Isabella, now 19 and a sophomore, at Oregon State University studying social work and psychology, split her time between classes and managing the organization's youth outreach programs. The original Victorian house on Main Street had been expanded to include a residential facility for young adults aging out of foster care, a counseling center, and what had become Isabella's favorite addition, a workshop space where Marcus taught woodworking to teenagers who needed a constructive way to process their emotions while searching for family connections. On this particular autumn morning, Isabella was reviewing applications for their newest program when her phone buzzed with a text that would bring their story full circle in a way none of them could have anticipated. The message was from Dr. Amanda Fletcher at Avon Valley. Margaret had a moment of complete clarity yesterday. She asked for you specifically. Can you visit this week? Isabella immediately called Marcus, who was at a job site installing custom cabinets for a young family whose reunion had been facilitated by their organization 3 months earlier. The cycle of helping and being helped had become a natural rhythm in their lives. Margaret asked for me by name, Isabella confirmed, still processing the significance. Margaret's condition had continued to deteriorate over the years, and while she remained gentle and responsive to affection, moments of clear recognition had become increasingly rare. That's what Dr. Fletcher said, Marcus replied. She specifically asked to see the girl who finds lost things. Eleanor and Robert are already on their way to the facility. Isabella made the drive to Avon Valley with a mixture of anticipation and sadness. Margaret had been such an important part of their family's healing journey, and seeing her struggle with the progression of her illness never got easier. But the possibility that she might have something important to communicate during a lucid moment was both hopeful and urgent. She found Margaret sitting in the facility's garden, more alert and focused than Isabella had seen her in months. Elena and Robert were positioned nearby, clearly amazed by the change in Margaret's demeanor. Isabella, Margaret said clearly when she approached, using her name without hesitation for the first time in years. I've been waiting for you. There's something I need to tell you before I forget again. Isabella settled into the chair beside Margaret, taking her hand gently. I'm here. What did you want to tell me? Margaret's eyes were unusually bright, focused with an intensity that reminded Isabella of their first meeting years earlier. I remember everything today. The diagnosis, leaving Robert, giving up hope of having children. But I also remember something I never told anyone, something I buried so deep I thought it was lost forever. She paused, seeming to gather her strength for what came next. Before I got sick, Robert and I tried for years to have a baby. We lost 3 pregnancies, and the doctors said it was unlikely I'd ever carry a child to term. The grief nearly destroyed us both. Isabella felt her heart clench, understanding intuitively that this revelation was leading somewhere significant. The last time I was pregnant, Margaret continued, I made it to 6 months before we lost the baby. It was a little girl. We had already chosen her name, Isabella Rose Chen. We decorated a nursery, bought clothes, made all those plans parents make. Isabella's breath caught. Her own name was Isabella Rose, something she'd always assumed Elena had chosen randomly. Margaret, are you saying... I'm saying that when Robert found out about you, when he learned that Elena had named her daughter Isabella, he believed it was a sign. He convinced Elena to let him help find you, not just because he wanted to make amends for his brother's actions, but because he felt like the universe was giving us a chance to love the Isabella we were meant to have. Elena, who had been listening from nearby, moved closer. Margaret, I had no idea. Robert never told me about your pregnancies. Margaret smiled with a clarity that seemed to illuminate her entire face. He wouldn't have. That's not who Robert is, but I need you all to know that finding Isabella, being part of her life, helped heal something in both of us that we thought was broken forever. She turned back to Isabella with tears in her eyes. You gave me the chance to love a daughter, even if I couldn't remember it most of the time. Every moment of joy you brought to Robert's life, you brought to mine too. You completed our family in ways we never expected, Isabella found herself crying, overwhelmed by the realization that her role in Robert and Margaret's life had been even more meaningful than she'd understood. "Thank you for telling me. That means everything." Margaret nodded, then looked around at Elena and Robert with the satisfied expression of someone who had accomplished an important task. "I wanted to make sure you knew before my mind goes dark again. Some truths are too important to leave unspoken." As if summoned by her words, the clarity began to fade from Margaret's eyes. Within minutes, she was back to her usual gentle confusion, smiling at everyone, but clearly unsure who they were. But the peace on her face suggested that unburdening herself of that long-held secret had brought her comfort. The drive back to Millbrook was quiet, each of them processing the emotional weight of Margaret's revelation. Isabella found herself thinking about the intricate web of connections that had brought their family together. Elena's fear leading to Isabella's abandonment, Robert's guilt driving him to help Elena, Marcus's loneliness making him open to adoption, and now the discovery that even their names had been cosmically connected. 2 weeks later, Isabella was presenting at a national conference on family reunification when she received another call that would add yet another chapter to their ongoing story. This time it was from a social worker in Seattle who had been following their organization's work. "We have a situation up here that sounds right up your alley," the social worker, Janet Morrison, explained. "A teenager named David Chen Jr. has been trying to track down information about his father's family. He knows his father was involved in some legal troubles years ago, but he's hoping to connect with any relatives who might help him understand his family history." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. David Chen Jr., the son of the man who had terrorized Elena, forced her into hiding, and inadvertently set their entire story in motion. "How old is the boy?" Isabella asked carefully. 17. He's been in foster care since he was 12, when his father was imprisoned. His mother struggled with addiction and wasn't able to care for him. He's aging out of the system soon and trying to build some kind of family connection before he's completely on his own. Isabella found herself in an impossible situation. Everything in her wanted to help a teenager in need. But this particular teenager was the son of the man who had caused Elena years of terror and trauma. The ethical and emotional implications were staggering. That evening, Isabella called an emergency family meeting. Elena, Robert, Marcus, Jake, and even Carmen gathered in their living room to discuss this unexpected development. "He's just a kid," Isabella argued after explaining the situation. "He can't be held responsible for what his father did, and if he's trying to build positive family connections, maybe we should help him." Elena was quiet for a long time before speaking. "I understand the impulse to help, Isabella, but David Jr. is literally the reason I had to give you up. His existence meant David would never have let me disappear with his child. The complications of helping him seem overwhelming. Robert, surprisingly, was the one who offered a different perspective. Maybe that's exactly why we should help him. David Jr. is as much a victim of his father's actions as anyone. If we can help him build a healthy life, maybe we can break the cycle of damage that David Sr. created." The debate continued for hours, with valid arguments on all sides. Jake worried about safety concerns and legal complications. Marcus questioned whether they had the emotional resources to take on such a complex case. Carmen pointed out that helping David Jr. might be the ultimate act of healing, transforming the source of their trauma into an opportunity for growth. Finally, Isabella made a proposal that surprised everyone. What if we helped him, but indirectly? We could work with the social worker in Seattle to connect him with resources and family counseling without revealing our connection to his father. If he genuinely wants to build a better life, we can support that without putting ourselves at risk. The compromise felt right to everyone. Over the following months, Lost and Found Family Services quietly funded David Jr.'s participation in a comprehensive family therapy program, provided him with a scholarship for community college, and connected him with mentors who could help him navigate young adulthood successfully. Isabella never met David Jr. directly, but she followed his progress through reports from the Seattle office. He was intelligent, motivated, and genuinely interested in understanding how to break free from his father's legacy. Most importantly, he showed no signs of inheriting his father's aggressive or controlling tendencies. 2 years later, Isabella received a letter that would forever change how she thought about forgiveness and redemption. It was from David Jr., who had somehow discovered the connection between their organization and his family's history. "Dear Ms. Thompson," the letter began, "I recently learned that Lost and Found Family Services has been helping me for the past 2 years, and that your family has a history with my father that I can only describe as tragic. I want you to know that I understand why you might have chosen not to help me directly, and I'm grateful that you chose to help me at all." The letter continued with David Jr.'s account of his efforts to understand and atone for his father's actions. He had volunteered at domestic violence shelters, participated in programs for children of incarcerated parents, and was studying social work with the goal of helping other young people overcome difficult family legacies. "I know I can never undo the harm my father caused," the letter concluded, "but I hope that by dedicating my life to helping others heal from family trauma, I can honor the second chance your organization gave me. You taught me that families aren't just about blood. They're about the choice to care for each other, despite everything that tries to pull them apart." Isabella shared the letter with her family during their regular Sunday dinner, a tradition that had evolved to include whoever needed a place at the table that week. Currently, their extended family included 3 young adults from their residential program, Margaret's sister Carmen, and Elena's newest piano student, a shy 8-year-old whose grandmother was learning English with Elena's help. "I think David Jr. understood something it took us years to figure out," Isabella reflected as she read the letter aloud. "A healing doesn't happen by avoiding the source of pain. It happens by transforming that pain into something useful." Elena nodded, her face showing the peace that had settled over her in recent years. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we helped him. He deserves the chance to be different from his father." As Isabella looked around the table at faces that represented their journey from loss to discovery to healing, she realized that their story had come to represent something larger than any of them had initially understood. They had created not just a family, but a model for how love could expand to include even the most unlikely connections. Margaret's health had continued to decline, and she had passed away peacefully the previous spring, surrounded by everyone who had learned to love her during her final years. Her funeral had been attended not only by their immediate family, but by dozens of families whose lives had been touched by their organization's work. Now, 5 years after that first reunion at Haven Valley, Isabella was preparing for her own next chapter. She'd been accepted to graduate school at the University of Washington, where she planned to study family therapy and community psychology. The residential program would continue under Elena's direction, while Marcus had decided to formalize his woodworking therapy program as a separate non-profit. "You know what I've learned from all of this?" Isabella announced as they cleared the dinner dishes together, continuing a conversation that had started at the table. "The most important thing about finding people isn't the search itself. It's what you do with the connection once you've made it." Robert, who had become Isabella's unofficial stepfather and closest confidant, smiled at her observation. "What do you mean? I mean that finding Eleanor was just the beginning. Finding Margaret was just the beginning. Even helping David Jr. was just the beginning. The real work happens in all the small moments after the reunion, the phone calls, the visits, the choice to keep caring, even when it's complicated. Marcus dried his hands and hugged Isabella, still amazed by the young woman his daughter had become. "So what's the most important thing you found in all these years of searching?" Isabella thought for a moment, looking around the kitchen that had been the heart of their unconventional family for as long as she could remember. "I think the most important thing I've found is that home isn't a place you discover. It's something you build, one choice at a time, with people who decide to stay." As the evening wound down and their extended family gradually departed for their own homes and rooms, Isabella stood in the doorway of Marcus's workshop, watching him put the finishing touches on a rocking chair for their newest residential program. Graduate, who was expecting her first child. The workshop still smelled of wood shavings and varnish, still felt like the safest place in the world. But now it also hummed with the energy of all the lives that had been touched by the work that started here. The teenagers who had learned to channel their anger into creation, the families who had found new ways to communicate while working. With their hands, the countless small repairs that had healed much more than just broken furniture. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Margaret's memorial garden is blooming beautifully. Stop by tomorrow if you can. The roses Henry Walsh planted are finally covering the whole arbor." Looking at that message, Isabella realized that their story would never really end. It would just keep growing, branching out like the climbing roses that now covered Margaret's memorial arbor, reaching toward light and creating beauty from what had once seemed like irreparable loss. Sometimes the most important discoveries, Isabella reflected, weren't about finding what was lost. Sometimes they were about recognizing that nothing was ever really lost in the first place. It was just waiting for the right moment and the right family to help it bloom again. In the distance, the bells of St. Matthew's Chapel chimed 9 o'clock. The same bells that had been ringing the night a baby was left on the church steps 19 years earlier. But instead of marking an ending, those bells now seemed to herald all the beginnings that were still to come, all the lost things still waiting to be found, all the families still waiting to discover that love could indeed expand to include anyone willing to join the search for home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.